Coming up on a new episode of Wonder Room, the final push for the playoffs. Marvel came into the week with an opportunity to win the 1 seed, but had a nightmare schedule to contend with. How would they fare against fellow top dogs Sirchester and Kitakami in the same week? Ambrittstown and Corway go down to the wire yet again. Who wins the rematch in what very well could be a playoff preview? Sunny Shore had an opportunity to rewrite the narratives about their faction. Would they be able to pull off the upset win over New Moon to make it into the playoffs? Heartbreaks and triumphs, who's in, who's out? The regular season finale of Wonder Room coming up next. Wonder Room is brought to you in part by Booze Mobile and by Kurtz's Chicken. And now for your host, King Vasser. Hello everyone and welcome back to Wonder Room. We meet at the conclusion of the regular season. It has been a fun and interesting 6 weeks. Perhaps the most competitive regular season we've ever seen in NWBA history. But we meet now where 16 teams become 10. Of course, only 10 teams can make to the playoffs and vie for that coveted NWBA championship. And we will get to that playoff picture in just a bit. But of course, we have to start with the set highlights for the week. And of course, being that this was our final week of competition, there was a lot of compelling gameplay over week 6. Obviously, with so many teams still being in playoff positioning, there were going to be some really intense, really down-to-the-wire sets. And again, we've got 4 sets to show you that embody just that. Marvel running double duty coming into week 6. They had arguably the hardest schedule of any team in the NWBA. First, a Versus Seeker matchup with Sirchester, the other 2 seed, over in the Ruby League. Meanwhile, while their match with New Moon would not be highlighted here, their match with Kitakami, arguably just as important, is, given that heading into the week, Kitakami was the number 3 seed in the Sapphire League, but also that Kitakami was very much in danger to slip down to a wildcard spot with a bad week. So this was very big, not only for Marvel to have a chance at sneaking the 1 seed off of New Moon, but to make sure that Kitakami wouldn't be their opponent in the league semifinals. Elsewhere, you've got a big Ruby League rematch between Ambrittstown and Corway. Went right down to the wire in King's first set as a GM in Season 7. Would the rematch be just as interesting? And then you've got New Moon and Sunny Shore, 2 teams sitting both in the playoff picture, but at complete opposite ends. New Moon having already clinched coming into the week and sitting decently pretty to get that coveted number 1 spot. Meanwhile, Sunny Shore was the number 6 in the Ruby League heading into the week and needed some help to make it in, but with a good enough week, would they be able to sneak into the playoffs? And would that come at the hands of a huge upset against the potential Sapphire number 1 team? First things first, Sirchester and Mauville. You know that Sirchester loves to play that hyper-offensive style, but of course they had to contend with Marvel's rain offense. And in the early going, it was actually Zamazenta getting the offense open, revealing that it has Stone Edge to take care of Tornadoes T very early. Oricorio having to Terra to live. Goes for the Quiver Dance. Zapdos comes in. Hurricane misses from Oricorio, but as Swampert comes in, Hurricane misses from Zapdos. So some early shenanigans from one of the most notorious moves in the game. Swampert able to get up rocks in exchanging of knockoffs between Pelly and Swampert. Swampert flip turns out into Oricorio, but Pelipper being slower means that Basculegion gets to come out in the rain, so Oricorio has to go down to a Surf. Blaziken comes in, reveals that it's Focus Sash, so it is going to be able to live, pick up the KO with the knockoff on Basculegion, and because of that speed boost, gets off 52% chip on Zamazenta before going down to a heavy slam. So in comes Ogre Pond, and it's actually Scarfed, so it picks up the KO on Zamazenta with the play rough. Swampert comes in, takes a Hurricane from Zapdos. Pelipper's gonna have to come back in. Swampert flip turns out into Ogre Pond. Ivy Cudgel's gonna take care of Pelipper. So the other Ogerpon, Cornerstone, comes in. It's going to live the Ivy Cudgel, and its own Ivy Cudgel is going to be able to KO regular Ogerpon back. So in comes Iron Thorns, who's actually able to live the Horn Leech, and so is able to get off a DD. It's going to be able to crunch, take care of Ogerpon. Zapdos comes in, Stone Age lands, so it's up to Flygon. Terra Steel comes through. It does live the Stone Age, no critical hit, so Iron Thorn goes down to the Earthquake, and Swampert goes down as well to what is most likely a banded Flygon. So game 1 goes to Mauville. Game 2, in exchanging of hazards, Pelipper comes in. Ogerpon going for a second layer of spikes. That's the game plan for Sirchester. Get as many hazards up as possible to allow their setup sweepers to take care of this team. Ogerpon comes in on Cornerstone, takes a Horn Leech. Zapdos comes in, easily able to take an Ivy Cudgel. Cornerstone doesn't really want to stay in for that matchup. Swampert able to take 2 Hurricanes and gets up rocks, breaking through the confusion. Goes down to a 3rd Hurricane, but at that point, that's 3 hazards up. Mew comes in, that was a swap for Tornadus Therian. Zapdos full switches out into Ogerpon as Mew goes straight for the agility. And good play here from Blades going straight for the Psychic, knowing Ogerpon could be locked and loaded with Encore, which it does see. So Ogerpon goes down. Blaziken comes in on the Flygon, which goes for the U-turn. Pelipper comes right back in, gets knocked. U-turns out, doesn't go for the damage on Blaziken, instead bringing in Basculegion Female because of the Swift Swim, meaning that it's going to outpace the Blaziken. Surf comes through on the Terra Water. So Blaziken goes down, Ogerpon comes in, Ivy Cudgel's on the Zapdos. You have to remember that a Scarf Ogerpon does in fact get to outspeed Modest Basculegion in the rain. Mew gonna go down to the Zapdos, feeling that it's Citrus Berry. Oricorio comes in, and Terra grounds Logan, not reading that, what should have been a fairly obvious Terra. And then it's very important because on the very next turn, reveals that he has Weather Ball. Oricorio getting to live, shows it has Icy Wind for the coverage, takes care of Zapdos. Flygon, crucially now, can't Terra to live. Zamazenta goes down after Hurricane lands. And so Pelipper is going to come back in, which means that it's very easy for Oricorio to just hit another 2 Hurricanes and pick up the sweep in Game 2. So we move now to Game 3 after the Sirchester victory. Thorns and Flygon the lead. Flygon going immediately for the Outrage, doing a lot of damage. And it's going to be able to live anything that Iron Thorn goes for. So a second Outrage is going to pick up the KO. Mew comes in, goes straight for the Agility, goes straight for the Psychic, doesn't want to get Encored again. Logan wisely going straight for the Ivy Cudgel. But thanks to that Citrus Berry, Blades go straight for the Nasty Plot instead because it's going to be able to live a second Cudgel. Psychic comes through, Flygon goes down, in comes Pelipper, but Mew's got the coverage Power Gem. So Pelipper goes down. Psychic not enough to KO Basculegion Female, but it's going to put it at a percent where any amount of hazard is going to take that thing out of the picture, and sure enough, Swampert immediately comes through, puts up the rocks. Ogerpon comes in on a Cornerstone Horn Leech. Basculegion gets sacked to the rocks the very next turn. So Cornerstone comes back in, goes straight for the Ivy Cudgel. Swampert easily able to take that. Ogerpon comes in on the Horn Leech, so Blades making some good switches. Zapdos comes in on an Ivy Cudgel. Fairly free move from Ogerpon. Because that move is non-contact, Static is not going to proc. Swampert comes in, takes the Hurricane, gets momentum right back with the flip turn. Ogerpon comes in, but crucially misses on the play rough. It would have been enough to take out Ogerpon Cornerstone, and because of that Horn Leech, the second one isn't going to KO. So Cornerstone gets the best of regular Ogerpon in that exchange. Arcanine comes through, was a swap for Blaziken, picks up the KO with E-Speed, reveals that it is in fact Life Orb. Hurricane only lands but crits, so Arcanine goes down, a big crit coming through from Zapdos. Swampert gets off the knockoff on Zamazenta, but at this point it doesn't really matter. CC's gonna pick up the KO. It's down to Oricorio Sensu. Terra comes out immediately. Logan going for a crunch. Oricorio gets up a Quiver Dance, does land the Hurricane, so Zamazenta goes down, and on the second Quiver Dance, Hurricane from Zapdos misses, so Icy Wind gonna be able to pick up the KO. Oricorio coming through in the clutch. 7 total KOs as Sirchester moves to 13-5-1, picking up a big interleague win on Mauville, who also sits at 13-5-1. Good offensive battle from both teams. But now Mauville sitting a game behind New Moon instead of being right on their tails yet again. For Sirchester, they still remain in the hunt for the Ruby League top seed. Ambertown and Coroway, we've seen these two teams before go head to head on Wonder Room, due for another classic battle. Out the gate, Coroway looking for some offense, going immediately for the CC from Cleavor, but you know that Ambertown is ready to play offense right back. Iron Crown going for the setup, but Toxapex locked and loaded with Haze. Not going to deter Ambertown, but a flamethrower from the Walking Wake, getting a very crucial burn on Iron Crown as it tries to set up. Toxapex comes in, has to go down to that stored power on turn 6. Klefki comes in and reveals that it is in fact screens, so going to be able to limit some of the damage from this Iron Crown, but Klefki's going to go all the way down to 7% before it finally picks up the KO. Gastrodon comes in, Cleavor swaps in on the rocks, and then goes for SD. Aleph trying to read and attack, going for the recover, and then gets blown up the next turn by a Trailblaze as coverage. So Cleavor picking up the KO on Gastrodon, getting off a lot of damage on that Slow King, and picks up the KO on the next turn with the Stone Axe. Terra's fighting, goes for the CC, and gets the big crit to take out Como. So in a matter of a few turns, Cleavor completely flipping the game right back around. Lucario's got a Terra Normal and E-Speed to finally pick up the KO. Picks up the KO on Klefki, getting sacked the very next turn. In comes Walking Wake. So Titan's gonna have to come in. Barely lives the Draco Meteor, pops the Citrus Berry. Moltres comes in to take the Ice Shard, gets off the Fire Blast, it lands, the Titan goes down, and then crucially the Lucario misses the Stone Edge. So an overheat from offensive Moltres is going to pick up the KO, and Coroway takes the first game. On to game 2, Toxtricity immediately out the gate. You see the game plan, Coroway definitely wanting to get their offense in early, but Como is able to block that Boom Burst with Soundproof, and then reads the double with Iron Crown, but unfortunately Klefki's the one that comes in. So Light Screen gets to go up, Gastrodon gets up rocks as some more switching around comes through. Eventually Slow King comes in on Walking Wake, takes a couple of Dragon Pulses, and is able to Tilly Reception out into Gastrodon, which is going to take a good 44%, but has self-healing, so it's going to be able to easily outpace Walking Wake's offenses. So Coroway cutting their losses, brings in Toxapex, Slow King comes back in, Toxic Spikes go up, Slow King Tilly Receptions out again into Iron Crown, and now we have to play the Calm Mind Haze game. Future Sight comes through, does a lot of damage to Toxapex, but Aleph going for those Calm Minds. You see that King refuses to press anything other than Haze, so we're at a stalemate. Stored Power comes to on turn 17, which is going to put Toxapex into KO range, but Aleph refusing the budge, going for the agilities. Eventually on turn 29, King actually takes his foot off the gas pedal and relinquishes that opportunity. Going into Moltres, gets off the Fire Blast and gets another burn on the Iron Crown. But at this point, Crown set up enough. Moltres goes down to the Stored Power. Klefki's gonna have to come in and put up screens. In comes Walking Wake, which still takes a good chunk from that Stored Power, over half, and is still slower than the Iron Crown at +2. So Walking Wake has to go down, and then Toxapex has to go down. So Klefki comes back in after having already set up the light screen, and is gonna have to pick up the KO after 3 Pokemon go down on Coroway's side to deal with the Iron Crown. So the other screen goes up, but Slow King's able to come in, goes for a Scald on Toxtricity, takes the overdrive, and is able to Tilly Reception out, and the big man comes through to Titan. Future Sight doing a lot of damage to Toxtricity. Doesn't matter, the Slush Rush means that the Titan goes first, picks up the KO with the Icicle Crash, but Klefki, a little cheeky Magnet Rise to stop the Earthquake, and so Aleph with no real way to hit this thing has to go for the Belly Drum, and King's able to read that, picks up the KO with the Foul Play. But it's still a 4-on-2 advantage for Ambertown. Lucario getting off big damage with those Meteor Mashes before Cleavor picks up the KO with the Close Combat. But at this juncture, Como is able to come in, outspeeds the Cleavor, or excuse me, doesn't outspeed the Cleavor, but it's not going to matter. Without a crit, it's not going to go down to the CC, picks up that KO with the Drain Punch. Klefki going to go down as well, and so we move to yet another Game 3 between Coroway and Ambertown, and this time Ambertown wants to set up the offense immediately. Goes for the sub with Como, but peep The numbers on the HP Aleph put the EV spread wrong, so after the belly drum, it's not going to pop the Solid Berry, but crucially, Moltres misses the first overheat. So the second overheat is going to put Como into Solid Berry range. Drain Punch going to be able to pick up the KO on Moltres, and so now Como exactly where it wants to be anyway. No matter, Walking Weight comes in thanks to Torkoal being the switch in, so it outspeeds Como, so we're going to see some more switching around here. Iron Crown comes in, goes for the Iron Defense, but it's scared of Torkoal with those fire moves, and it makes sense. Iron Crown hasn't had a lot of luck dealing with these fire moves in this set. So you see some more switching back and forth, both teams just jockeying for momentum. Como eventually comes in on Klefki to scare it out. Gets off a Drain Punch, but that Toxapex is in fact Rocky Helmet, so Como's gonna have to go down after another attack, so it's gotta switch out. So Titan comes in on Toxapex and gets off an EQ as King expects Belly Drum, and then the second EQ crit, so Toxapex going down in a very crucial moment of the battle. Still some more switching around to do. Iron Crown does not want to deal with that Torkoal whatsoever. Slow King comes in, gets off another Future Sight. Till Reception's back out on a light screen. Crown comes back in. Crown once again going for a Calm Mind. Torkoal taking a decent bit of chip. And so this is the game plan for Amber Town now, just trying to slowly whittle away at Coral Waves Mons with Slow King thanks to Future Sight, or eventually get a favorable switch in. Lucario able to meter mash on the Torkoal, lands the Stone Edge with no reflect up, so Torkoal finally goes down. Walking Wake has to come in, but we already seen that it can't really do much between Slow King and Gastrodon being on the field. So Slow King's able to Chilly Reception out, cancel out that Sun, so Booster Energy has to pop for Walking Wake. Gastrodon comes back in. At this point, Amber Town up 6-3, content to just start chipping away at this Walking Wake. Gastrodon gonna bring it down to 18% before it goes down to a Dragon Pulse after Poison Chip. So the Titan comes back in on the snow, picks up the Ice Shard KO, and it's Icy Rock on the Slow King, so Titan would be able to stay in, but Como comes in as a sack on Klefki, not wanting to deal with that Magnet Rise shenanigans again. Lucario gets off Big Chip on the Cleaver on turn 33 after some more switching out, and at this point, Titan can freely go for Earthquake, gets off a lot of damage on the Klefki, goes for the Icicle Crash. As you can see, it's only doing 8% behind screens, but no matter, Titan has done what it needs to do, gets off a good amount of chip on the Klefki before it goes down to another foul play on a Belly Drum. And at this point, Iron Crown can come in, Iron Defense up, easily deal with Cleavor, Store Power picks up the KO. Klefki can't do anything back, it goes down, and so Amber Town for the second time this season is able to escape with a win over Coralway, moves to 16-5 with just one more win. They clinch the Ruby Ribbon, and more notably, Titan once again making history, the first Mon in NWBA history with 100 or more total KOs on a season. So congratulations to Amber Town. Coralway unfortunately unable to pick up the upset win, drops to 9-10-1. Big time Sapphire League matchup, Kitakami looking to stay out of the wildcard picture. Mauville looking to continue their push for the #1 seed. Out the gate, you see the Bella Bolt in action. CJ's coach Jake hyped this Mon up a lot, and in the early goings, it was looking pretty solid, getting off that big Toxic on the Talonflame, not really taking that much damage. Talonflame already below half. In comes the Zamazenta as the Belly Bolt recovers back up to full. Volt Switch thanks to that Electromorphosis doing a healthy 41%. Zamazenta scared out by the Enamorous. You have to fear Scarf, of course. Talonflame comes in to take the Moonblast, goes down anyway. Hydrapple coming in on the Ogerpon, gets knocked but gets off some good damage thanks to that Giga Drain. Ogerpon going for spikes now. You know that the hazard game is going to be very crucial for two teams that lack hazard control. Zapdos comes in on the Hydra Giga Drain, so Bellabolt comes back in, takes that Volt Switch like a champ. Zamazenta comes back in, goes for the Iron Defense again, but that just allows Bellabolt to get off the Toxic. So now Zamazenta gonna have to start going for some damage. There's a lot to the Bellabolt, who's able to Volt Switch out. So in comes Enamorous again, but based off the damage to the Talonflame, Logan deduces that this is not in fact Scarf and is a correct assumption. So Enamorous is gonna have to go down there, and then just as a reveal, Ice Fang coming out as the coverage for Hydrapple does a good 54%, but it's not going to be enough for Ogerpon to pick up the KO with the Ivy Cudgel. So Hydrapple gets off the Giga Drain for the KO, and then lives the Volt Switch from the Zapdos. So gets off a lot of damage on Pelipper. Bellabolt comes back in as Logan double switches into Zapdos, gets off the Hurricane, so Bellabolt finally goes down. In comes Gargasalt. Takes that Volt Switch very easily and gets off a big Sulk here on the Basket Legion female. And so the Protect on Garg is going to be very crucial. Obviously, you have to play a guessing game. Ghost type, Garg will be able to handle. Water type move, Vaporeon is going to be able to handle. So it's going to be interesting to see how Marvel tries to break through Kitakami's defenses. Zapdos able to pick up the KO on the Hydrapple. Gets off a lot of damage on the Garg, but interestingly enough, goes for the Thunder and not something like Weather Ball. You see, on turn 25, Thunder does in fact land without the rain, so Garg is going to go down. Vaporeon comes in. Interestingly enough, Zapdos switches out. So Vaporeon's going to be able to get off a Wish as Pelipper goes for Roost. Skull's not going to do too much to Pelipper. Goes straight for the Hurricane, does a decent amount, but Vaporeon's going to be able to easily outpace that thanks to Wish and Protect. So Pelipper just U-turns out on another Scald. In comes Zapdos, who goes for the Thunder. It's not going to pick up the KO on Vaporeon, but CJ, a crucial mistake, goes for the Wish instead of trying to pick up the KO on Zapdos. So as a result, Vaporeon's going to go down to Zapdos anyway. So in comes Braviary, who's got a Terra to live, does in fact do so, picks up the KO with the Psychic as the rain runs out, but Pelipper being alive means it can just come right back in. Doesn't matter if it gets sacked. Basket Legion female is going to outspeed the Surf, picking up the final KO of game 1. On to game 2, immediate spikes from Mauville, but an immediate nasty plot from Kitakami's side. Hydrapple going for another nasty plot on the Ivy Cudgel. Knock finally comes through from the Ogerpon, so that Giga Drain at +4 is going to do enough to put Ogerpon into sturdy range and pick up the KO with the second one as Hydrapple stays just a shade under 50%. Magnezone comes in, the switch in for Talonflame, but the Flash Cannon not going to kill, so gets blown up by an Earth Power. So Hydrapple picking up 2 KOs before it finally goes down to Zamazenta. And then Logan trying to get a read with the Heavy Slam, but CJ Wisely not tearing, picks up the KO with the Psychic, and then immediately dispatches the Pelipper as well. That Life Orb Sheer Force doing so much damage from Braviary. Zapdos finally takes care of that problem, but now it's just 2 on 4. And again, we mentioned earlier, between Garg and Vaporeon, Kitakami has the answers for the worst of the rain offense. And so you see a lot of switching back and forth here. Kitakami trying to catch Vaporeon slipping like so, but Vaporeon lives the Thunder and is able to flip turn out right back into Garg. Zapdos going for the Thunder is doing a lot, but it's not going to be able to get the para thanks to Garg's ability. So the Sarkir takes care of the Zapdos, and then because there's still 4 Mons left on Kitakami's side, Basket Legion female's got to go for an Ice Beam, so Garg is easily going to be able to take that, stall out a little bit more, and eventually Mauville concedes the game. So we move to game 3. Bellabolt the lead again. Same with Ogerpon. Cornerstone. Toxic coming out immediately. Spike on the other side. Ogerpon able to knock off Hydrapple early this time and get out of dodge before any of these nasty plot shenanigans. So Garg has to come in on Zapdos. Easily takes a Hurricane. So you expect the Salt Cure to come out here, but instead, Kitakami getting up rocks. Very crucial for this game 3. Bellabolt comes back in, is easily able to deal with Magnezone, and this is a really interesting matchup as the freeze comes through on the Tri-Attack. Bellabolt's still able to tank what Magnezone is able to do, and fortunately for CJ, gets a fairly early thawing out, so Bellabolt's able to slack off in front of the Ogerpon, takes the knock fairly easily, gets off the discharge, does a decent amount of tip to that Ogerpon, who has to take the toxic damage, so Magnezone has to come back in. And we talked about this matchup. Magnezone can't really damage Bellabolt that easily. Bellabolt can't damage Magnezone that well either, but only one of these mods has the ability to heal, and thanks to Bellabolt being slower, its Electromorphosis means it's going to be hitting Magnezone harder than Magnezone's hitting it back. Ogerpon comes in as the sack on turn 13, so Zamazenta is able to come back in. Immediately goes for an Iron Defense as Bellabolt gets off the slack off. So that body press, even at +3, not going to be able to kill the Bellabolt. So it's able to get off a Toxic on Zamazenta. And so CJ is going to be swapping around to try to maintain a little bit of momentum, chip down the Zamazenta. But Hydrapple's going to have to go down. CJ, interestingly enough, not switching it around, knowing that thing has Regenerator. So he's going for Protect Stall on Vaporeon to keep trying to whittle this thing down. But Logan, interestingly enough, takes Zamazenta out. So Vaporeon gets off a Wish, gets a Scald on the Pelipper, but is able to roost that off, so the Wish ends up getting wasted. And so Pelipper is going to be able to U-turn out, get momentum back on the side of Mauville. Zapdos comes in, doesn't KO Vaporeon, does get the para on the Wish. So Guard comes in, Vaporeon no longer a reliable switch into anything. Wish is going to be able to heal Guard up to high percents. Zapdos gets off the Volt Switch, but nothing left on this team wants to take Assault Cure. Magnezone, Pelipper, and Legion all taking that added damage from the Salt Cure turns. Zapdos already taking a healthy amount, so Magnezone's going to go down there. Zapdos comes in with the Thunder, does in fact see a Salt Cure instead of a Recover, so Garg is at a really weird percent, needs to protect to get some HP back. Zapdos goes for the Volt Switch, and then goes for another Volt Switch instead of going for the Thunder for the kill, so Garg able to heal up some more as Zamazenta comes in. But on the Body Press, Garg stays in to get off the Salt Cure. So now, once again, Garg at a weird percent where it could go down in a turn or two. Goes for the Protect. Body Press, obviously blocked, but Zamazenta is going to be able to live after Toxic and Salt Cure. And the Body Press is going to pick up the KO on Garg. So the biggest part of Kitakami's defense goes down there. Basilisk Female comes in on Vaporeon, easily able to go for a Shadow Ball. Vaporeon has to go down. Bellbolt's going to end up getting sacked as well. So it's down to just Enamorus and Braviary. Braviary comes in. Immediately Terras goes for that Psychic, gets rid of Pelipper, lives the Thunder, and gets paired for good measure. At this point, the rain is up. It doesn't matter. Basilisk Female is going to get the clean anyway. Just that ever so slightly needed chip coming through at the very end. So Mauville does in fact take the set over Kitakami. 5 KOs apiece from both Legion and Zapdos. Mauville moves to 14-5-1 and keeps their visions of the #1 seed in the Sapphire League alive. For Kitakami, they dropped to 12-9. Now half a game behind Humalao, needing a win in their final set of the week to avoid that wildcard match. New Moon and Sunny Shore heading into this matchup. New Moon had nothing to play for, but Sunny Shore had everything to play for. A player berth on the line, and the high octane action hit right from the get-go. Caesar packing up Gamora and then revealing that it is in Salt Vest and getting that big KO on Masquerada. So right out the gate, New Moon off to a great start. And then the liquidation from Overquill gets the crit and takes out Mamoswine. So that is a massive 6-3 lead. Just 5 turns in, Meloetta finally able to take out something. Overquill goes down, but now Caesar comes back in, and Gengar's not gonna be able to take 2 bullet punches, crit or not. So in comes the Greninja to finally dispatch the Caesar after 4 KOs. Battle Bond activated, but that isn't anything to an unaware Clefable. Easily takes care of Greninja with the Moonblast, and Meloetta is already low. Important information here, the Meloetta is in fact Assault Vest, but 2 Hyper Voices isn't going to pick up the KO anyway, so that's a very fast Game 1 win for New Moon. Game 2, Sunny Shore adapts, Gamora goes straight for the Earth Power on the Overquill, so Overquill is going to go down very early, which also means that the Toxic Spikes are going to stay up for Sunny Shore's side. Caesar is able to pick up the Revenge KO on Gamora, and because it's AV, takes care of the Greninja, which really can't do much of anything in this set between Caesar and Clefable. Big Focus Blast miss from the Gengar means that Rotom Heat's going to be able to get off a huge overheat and then pick up the KO afterwards with the Volt Switch. So Caesar comes back in comes Masquerada. The knockoff comes through and it does pick up the KO for Masquerada. So Caesar goes down, in comes Dragonite, which goes for the DD. Gets off a big Dragon Claw, but Meloetta's gonna be able to live that easily. Gets off the U-turn, and because it's a Dragonite, you're not really gonna see lefties. Ice Shard picks up the KO. Rotom comes back in. Will-O-Wisp, the Mamoswine, who's able to do some good damage with the knockoff, but because it's burned, it's not gonna be able to pick up the KO just yet after the second one, which means After a few overheats, Rotom Heat is going to be able to pick up the KO instead. Mamoswine still KOing Rotom, but it's a trade, so it's 2-2 now. Meloetta comes in on the Clefable, but because it's AV, it's going to be able to live 2 Moonblasts and pick up the KO on Clefable with the Hyper Voice, so it comes down to just Mudsdale, which is able to easily tank the Hyper Voice and pick up the KO with the Body Press, but that Toxic coming through, putting this thing on a timer, and it's not going to matter because the Mudsdale is Terra Water and not Terra Poison, so Masquerada picks up the last KO. Sunny Shore is able to bring this to a game 3. Mudsdale the lead against Glamora, who has been the lead all 3 games. This time Nico not messing around, going back to what he did the first game, just taking care of Glamora from the get-go with a mon that isn't Overquill. So Masquerada comes in, Overquill comes in on the Masquerada, takes a healthy amount from the Flower Trick, but it's not going to 2-shot, so Meloetta's got to come in, and you know for sure that's banded damage, but unfortunately the Gunk Shot misses on Meloetta, who's able to U-turn out into Gengar and pick up that KO with the Dazzling Gleam. So in comes Mudsdale. Meloetta's going to be the sack to the Earthquake. Masquerada comes back in. Now Rotom Heat's got to come in. Zach predicts that, goes for the knockoff, and the second one's going to easily be able to pick up the KO. So in comes Clefable, and it's time for the New Moon Classic. You figured at some point the setup was going to happen. Clefable taking a healthy 40% or so from these EQs, but that is not going to be enough to keep Clefable from not getting it all back with the Moonlights. So Gengar is going to have to come in, goes for some Sludge Waves, and it's doing a good amount of damage, enough to force Clefable to consistently go for Moonlights. But once Clefable is going to be able to get in another Calm Mind, it's going to be all over. You see on turn 17 that Calm Mind to get Clefable up to +4 does in fact come through. But on turn 19, the Sludge Wave finally gets the Poison, which is going to really help offset that recovery. And so Nico trying to stall out as much as possible to hopefully go for the sweep, but eventually he's going to have to just go for these Moonblasts because Moonlight, again, that very crucial Gen 9 nerf, Healing moves only get APP. So as a result, Clefable is going to have to go down to the Sludge Wave, and because of the Cursed Body, Clefable reveals that it's Wish as a last move, not even able to pick up the KO on Gengar. So Caesar comes in, takes care of that, gets up to full thanks to that Wish, U-turns out on the Greninja, gets the KO with the crit. Mudsdale comes in to entice the Masquerada. Masquerada gets off that Flower Trick that does in fact take care of Mudsdale, but that's free reign for Dragonite to come in, get off the DD, and reveal that it does have Iron Head for the Mamoswine, so that is going to be a New Moon win in a very fast-paced 3-game set. Caesar with 7 total KOs, leading for the second time in 2 seasons, League Ribbon winning New Moon Darkrai. Granted, they were not the New Moon Darkrai last season, but that is still Nico's 2nd consecutive League Ribbon. And for Sunnysore, who is now 2-5 in their last 7 sets, they are now on the brink of playoff elimination. All right, and with these set highlights out of the way, we spoiled just a little bit of the playoff picture for you. Let's not waste any more time. Let's get right on into it. Who was able to advance to the Season 7 playoffs? The final edition of the Ruby League standings goes like this. Ambrit Town still remains the #1 team. They finished with a record of 17-5, 3-1 on the week. There were forfeits this week, plenty of them as a matter of fact. Black City and Nacreen City notably among them, who forfeited all their matches, but a win is still a win, and at the end of the day, Ambrit Town was extremely likely to win those anyway. 3-1 week, more than good enough to maintain their spot atop the Ruby League. Chichester finishes at #2 with a 15-6-1 record, also went 3-1 on the week. So another great season for Blades. That's back-to-back seasons where they have won 15 or more games. So pretty good start to a career, we would say. Mount Coronet does in fact hold on to that #3 spot, finishing at 12-9-1. We're in danger of dipping into the wild card with a poor week. A 2-2 week isn't bad. That'll get it done. As a matter of fact, Mount Coronet forfeited their matches against Veilstone and Mistralton, knowing that they were locked into the 3 after their first 2 victories. Coraway remains the #4, finishing with a record of 10-11-1. Unfortunately, not able to break above 500 for King, but still picked up wins where it was needed against Sunny Shore, very crucially, and Mistralton. So as a result, Coraway shows up as your first wildcard team. The number 5 team, that very interesting spot that we were all wondering about heading into the week, belongs to Veilstone in a surprise of the season. 3-1 record on the week. Only loss was to Humalau. Again, was awarded forfeits via Mount Coronet and Nat Green City, but crucially won the head-to-head against Sunny Shore, kept themselves in the hunt just long enough to sneak into the playoffs as the final team. And they did so off of the game count tiebreaker. We very rarely have to go into the third tiebreaker as far as playoff rules are concerned, but that's what it took for Veilstone to sneak into the playoffs, meaning that the number 6 team was actually Sicily, also finishing with an identical record of 9-13. They went 1-1 with Veilstone over the course of the season, so it comes down to game count, and unfortunately for Flair, them having not played as many sets as the rest of the league came back to bite them in the end. As a matter of fact, Sicily had to forfeit half of their matches this week because of their unavailability for Saturday. So as a result, Sicily, who seemed like the favorite to make it to the playoffs, in fact has to give away their opportunity to Veilstone. So it will be Veilstone and not Sicily making it into the playoffs. You see the number 7 team, Sunny Shore, 8-14 as a final record, went out winless in their final week of competition. Obviously, with the playoffs within reach, a week like that is an absolute heartbreaker. Wasn't an easy week. They did have to contend with Coraway, New Moon, and Veilstone, but the fact of the matter is, not being able to walk away with a single win was very unfortunate for Sunny Shore, especially considering that had they taken the set from either New Moon or Coraway, or at the very least won some games along the line somewhere before in the season, then they could have technically won the game count tiebreaker over Veilstone. Instead, they finish at 7th. Black City opted to forfeit their final week of matches, knowing that they weren't in contention, so as a result, they finish at 3-19. Very, very rough end to the season for Keith. Started 3-3, ended up losing their final 16 sets of the season. As far as the Sapphire League is concerned, we already spoiled it for you earlier. New Moon did, in fact, get the number 1 seed in the Sapphire League with a final record of 17-5. So both league ribbon leaders finished with a final record of 17-5. Interesting. Typically, you see at least one team rack up 19 or more wins, but being that this was the most competitive season in NWBA history up to this point, it makes sense that New Moon really had to fight to keep their spot atop the Sapphire League standings. 3-1 over the week. Notably, did not actually play Mauville. Mauville opted to forfeit against New Moon. Whether that was strategy or fear, we don't know. We will have to see with the way the playoffs shake out. For what it's worth, Mauville did in fact finish 2nd in the Sapphire League standings, the best finish to date for Luck in their long tenure as NWBA GM. Final record of 14-7-1, still very good, but 1-3 over the final week, not what you want to see. But if nothing else, they got a very crucial win over Kitakami, which was technically the most important win for them, game for them, on the week. Humalau surprisingly moves up to number 3, so they avoid the wild card match, finishing with a final record of 12-9-1, 3-1 over the week, including big win over Mistralton. Did in fact lose to Hearthome head-to-head, so they end up splitting the season series, but it didn't matter. That sweep over Mistralton proved to be more crucial. The team they jump for that number 3 spot, Kitakami, sitting at 12-10, finishing at the number 4. So CJ, who had by far their best season to date, was unfortunately unable to keep a top 3 seed by the end of the season. Still, of course, made their first ever playoff appearance, so congratulations to them, but 2-2 on the week, including losing to both Mauville, who they could have beaten to retain a top 3 seed, and also getting swept in the head-to-head by Mistralton. So, interesting 2 losses, if nothing else, for Kitakami. They did, in fact, however, get big wins over Ambertown and Koroway, so that doesn't mean that this is a team in a slump. It just means the matchups have been kind of weird for Kitakami heading into the playoffs. The final playoff team in the Sapphire League was, in fact, Heart Home, also finishing at 12-10, 4-0 on the week. It should be noted, 3 of those wins came via forfeit, so Heart Home didn't have to work particularly hard to make it into the playoffs in the final week of the season. But by getting that big win over Humalau and splitting the season series, that is ultimately what allowed them to catapult above the rest of the field to make it into the final spot. Mistralton, therefore, was unfortunately the 6th seed, 11-11, good record. It's rare that you see a team with a 500 or better record miss the playoffs. As a matter of fact, it's worth noting that there was an 11-11 team last season that was the 3 seed in the Sapphire League. What a difference a season can make. 2-2 over the course of the week. Got a big win against Kitakami and got the forfeit over Mount Coronet, but unfortunately the loss to Humalau is ultimately what doomed them. And it should also be noted that had Mistralton found a way to beat Heart Home in the rematch, their records would have swapped and it would have been Mistralton in that final spot. Instead, Heart Home makes it in, Mistralton unfortunately out. The 7, of course, Little Root, a bit surprisingly actually, 7-15, 3-1 over the course of the week. So AZ coming into this week with just 4 wins to their name almost doubles that total by going 3-1 over the course of the week. So they were able to avoid the very last spot in the Sapphire League, where they have been sitting for the entire season. That award, so to speak, goes to Nat Queen City, finishing with a final record of 5-16-1. Unfortunately had to forfeit their final week of matches, so they end up as the last place team in the Sapphire League. Had they been more available over the course of the season, they could have potentially competed harder for a playoff spot, but it is what it is. Availability, always that big X factor for the NWBA. So as a result, Nat Queen City finishing at the bottom of the Sapphire League standings. We do have a final version of the power rankings heading into the postseason, and there's been a lot of movement, the most movement that we have seen up to this point in the season. New Moon and Ambertown, of course, by virtue of being the top seeded teams in their respective leagues, remain the top 2 teams in the power rankings. But Sirchester and Mount Coronet end up jumping Mauville in the final edition, moving up to 3 and 4, while Mauville falls to 5 by virtue of their lackluster week, and again, being punished for not playing against New Moon. Humalau and Kitakami remain at 6 and 7. Humalau ended up jumping Kitakami in the standings, so now the power rankings accurately reflect the standings, but by virtue of their weeks, it would not have mattered. Humalau would have ended up jumping them anyway. Koroway and Heart Home move up to 8 and 9 by virtue of them solidifying their playoff spots, jumping over Mistralton, who still remains in the top 10 despite missing the playoffs, but by virtue of having a few wins more than Veilstone, they get a little bit of a consolation prize by remaining the number 10 team. Veilstone does, however, move up to 11, jumping over both Sicily and Sunny Shore, who they made the playoffs over, and then Little Root jumping over Nat Queen City by virtue of passing them up in the standings. So this is your not necessarily cheat sheet to the playoffs, but a good idea of which teams are peaking at the right time and which teams you wouldn't necessarily be surprised to see make an early exit in the playoffs. The final edition of the stats leaderboard for the week looks pretty peculiar. A lot of the same Pokemon on these charts, given the fact that a lot of teams didn't play a full week of matches, so the Mons that did well didn't face very much competition. Koroway's Walking Wake finished as the top KO getter and point scorer on the week with 17 KOs and 29 points apiece. Blaziken of Sirchester finishes second in both categories with 12 KOs and 24 points. Scizor of New Moon finishes with 11 KOs, good for third in that category, and 21 points, good for fourth in that category. Enamorous Eye of Kitakami, who we have seen time and time again, finishes the week with 10 KOs, good for fourth, while there was a four-way tie in fifth place with 9 KOs apiece. Both Braviary H and Gargasalt of Kitakami, so Kitakami putting up a lot of the top scorers this week, as well as Basque Legion Female of Mauville and Golden Go of Humalau. Chansey tops the assist leaderboard with 11 for Humalau, Gargasalt coming in second with 10, and then a three-way tie between Tinglu of Sirchester, Toxapex of Coralway, and Overquill of New Moon with 7 each. Heading back to that points category, Gargasalt did finish third on the week with 22 points. Gargasalt just 1 KO away from an incredibly rare double week. Still very productive and ended up being third overall in points for it. Two-way tie at fifth place with 18 points apiece, being Enamorous Eye and Golden Go. On to the per game categories, Torterra leads both for Mount Coronet, putting up 5.5 points per game and 3.0 KOs per game. Raiko of Heart Home finishes second in both categories with 5 points per game and 2.5 KOs per game. Pretty even and clean. Blaziken finished third in both categories with 4.8 points per game and 2.4 KOs per game. Garchomp of Litterroot finishes in a tie for fourth place in points per game with 4.5, as well as Tinkaton for Mistralton with 4.5. Interesting to note, both of those Pokemon got that done by putting up both KOs and assists in their lone set of the week. Always nice to see a mine get it done on both sides of the floor. Back over to the KOs per game category, the aforementioned Scizor finished in fourth with 2.2, and then a two-way tie at fifth with 2 KOs per game between Halucha of Litterroot and Iron Crown of Ambrit Town. Your final Ruby League Pokemon of the week goes to Walking Wake of Coralway. It's 17 KOs and 29 points, both led the league this week, and had a strong 2.9 points per game and 1.7 KOs per game. Notably, Walking Wake, one of those Pokemon that almost never get to see a full week of action, and now you know why. When this mon finally unleashed, it's able to rack up a bunch of KOs and put together a ton of offense, and was instrumental in keeping Coralway in the playoff picture and allowing them to make it as a wildcard team. Over for the Sapphire side of Pokemon of the Week, you get Scizor of New Moon. That makes New Moon's second winner this season. 11 KOs was number 1 in the Sapphire League, while it's 21 points and 2.2 KOs per game were both second in the Sapphire League, and still put up a very strong 4.2 points per game. New Moon, one of those teams that doesn't really have an MVP. They've been very balanced over the course of the season, but sometimes there just so happens to be one Pokemon on that roster that puts together all of the KOs and ends up cleaning up all the games, and this time around it was Scizor, a well-respected and very strong NWBA veteran for sure. The final edition of the MVP ladder before the end of season ballots are counted looks like this. Ruby League, once again, not too much change, but we do see a new contender emerge. So Titan remains at the top spot, of course, and will almost guaranteed be an overwhelming favorite to win the Ruby League MVP. As a matter of fact, there is an opportunity for Titan to walk away with that award unanimously, which we have never seen in league history, but certainly very possible. Gliscor moves up to number 2 in the standings because Landers Therian has dropped out entirely after seeing virtually zero play for Coralway this week. Instead, Blaziken of Sirchester moves up to number 3, having put up one of the highest point totals in the Ruby League to end the season. Granted, due to the presence of its teammate Iron Thorns, it's hard to see this mon getting any sort of late votes. So the Wing still sits at that number 5 spot, but again, it's unlikely that anyone other than Titan is going to win this award, and you might not see another Pokemon win a vote on that side. Over on the Sapphire League side of things, it looks as if Basque Legion Female is going to remain the favorite to win the award, keeping its top spot just ahead of Haxorus of Humalao. Ogerpon Cornerstone remains at number 3, and you only really see movement at the bottom of this ladder, where Enamorous Eye of Kitakami ends up jumping over Umbreon of Mistralton due to the fact that Umbreon didn't have the greatest performance in its only game played this week, while Enamorous Eye was able to put up another strong week of play. Vasser Legion Female does in fact look to be the favorite, and not necessarily overwhelmingly so, but certainly solidly so, but we've seen stranger things happen. Would not be a surprise to see Haxorus take that award off of the strength that 2 Marvel Milotics are so high up on this ladder. And with that, we move to the final segment of this week's episode. Gonna be running it a little bit differently because, of course, there are no roster moves to cover. The free agent deadline was after week 5. And because it's the end of the regular season, there are no upcoming matchups to talk about. Instead, we talk about the playoff bracket, what we might see, what we could see, and what we very well will see for the remainder of the season. So, your Season 7 playoff bracket looks like this. We will start with the explanation of the seeds and the bracket pathing. The 1 seed in each league gets a technical bye. They do in fact start in the semis, much like the 2 and the 3 seeds will, but they get the advantage of getting to watch the wild card matchup and see who their opponent is from that, whereas the 2 and the 3 seeds are slated to play each other. That wild card matchup is best of 1, no bans. It is not like the rest of the playoffs, which is still standard best of 3 format until you get to the NWBA finals, where it is best of 5 and bans are in effect for all those matchups. You have to play the other team to full strength and you get 1 game. That's why it's called the wild card. So we start with Coroway and Veilstone. In their 2 matchups this season, Coroway swept both of them. Notably, one of them was when Z was still the GM of Coroway. And it's worth noting that both of these teams changed so much between week 4 and now, so the bans and the game plans are essentially out the window. What is important in this potential matchup is that Coroway is the one running the Sun offense this time around. They have Torkoal and Walking Wake, but Veilstone still has a lot of the mons they used on that Sun team, including Heatran, Slitherwing, and Screamtail. So it is a question as to whether or not we will even see Coroway attempt that, or if they want to go a different path. On the Sapphire side, Kitakami and Hearthome, both matchups went 2-1, but Hearthome was in fact the victor in both of them. Also notable that in those 2 matchups, Kitakami opted to ban Tyranitar and Excadrill, so it seems like they wanted to separate that Sand Core as much as possible. They will not have the luxury of doing so in this matchup. Does that, in fact, entail that Hearthome is likely to win? Perhaps. That is something to look out for, so don't be surprised if Hearthome keys in on that and brings both of those mons to that wildcard matchup. As far as potential semis matchup between Ambert Town and one of those wildcard teams and Newman, one of those wildcard teams, we don't really want to get into that just yet because obviously that's a lot of speculation. Best of 1, no bans means that it's basically a coin flip. And the last one we want to do is talk about what those 2 teams could be looking at, even though there's only one of 2 matchups that they could possibly face. Instead, we will talk about the other semis matches that have already been set up. The most interesting one being Sirchester and Mount Coronet, who have not actually played at all this season, despite being matched up twice. Their first encounter ended up being a draw due to both of them not being available. The second matchup ended up being a Sirchester forfeit due to them not being available. So we have no relevant information on what this matchup would necessarily look like. We don't know what they're going to ban. What we do know is that both of these teams prefer a hyper offensive style. Obviously, Mount Coronet, very big on setup sweeper, setup sweeper, setup sweeper, whereas Sirchester plays it a little bit more balanced. They do employ some defensive mons, but it's mostly the idea of setting up hazards with either Swampert or Ting Lu, getting in Torn T to take a hit, pivoting out into one of these setup sweepers, and getting to business. So this will most likely be the fastest paced matchup of the first 2 rounds of the playoffs, we just have no idea who's actually going to be favored to win that one. As far as Mauville and Humalau are concerned, Mauville swept the season series, but both games went to Game 3. Iron Valiant and Haxorus being the bans on Mauville's side, and while Humalau's first ban was Lander's Theory, who's no longer on this roster, their second ban was Pelipper. So, interesting to note that Humalau wanted to try to get rid of the Weather Enabler from Mauville's roster. We will see if they opt for a repeat of that strategy, or if they would rather ban one of those 2 MVP candidates on Mauville's team and just deal with the rain as it is. The Ruby League as a whole, the top 3 seeds are all GMs who have never made an NWBA Finals, so it does seem as if we are going to see at least one new appearance in the NWBA Finals. But the fact that the wild card hosts both of the GMs who have made it before, including the Season 3 champion in King, GM Ikoroway, means that there's a lot of experience in that wild card matchup. Wouldn't be too shocked to see one of them get some momentum going and end up making a Cinderella run through this bracket, especially considering Veilstone, you could argue, shouldn't even be here, not only with a losing record, but also the fact that they were well out of the playoff picture coming into week 6 and still found a way to make it in. As far as the Sapphire side is concerned, New Moon, having made it to the NWBA Finals last season, is gearing up to be the second team ever to make multiple appearances. But you have a GM who's made it to the finals before in Kobe. With Humalau, luck with Mauville has found a way to make multiple Final Four appearances, so it would not be a surprise. Whoever wins that Sapphire semis matchup is well experienced and well versed in the playoffs, so it wouldn't be a surprise to see one of those 2 teams end up making it out. But you can't count out either of those wildcard teams either. Hard Home was here last season, Kitakami was not, but that means that they are the hungriest team, and you can never count out the hungriest. All in all, a lot of room to speculate, a lot of room to debate. This has been the most wide open season in NWBA history up to this point, so it wouldn't be all that surprising to see a crazy matchup like a 4 and a 3, or a 2 and a 5, or a 1 and a 4, something to that degree, end up meeting in our NWBA Finals. That's going to wrap it up for this week's episode. Thank you all for watching. I've been your host, King Vasser. Important update, you will not see a Wonder Room episode next week. Instead, the next time you will see us will be right before the NWBA Finals. Likely to be a few Sundays from now, so don't worry. More is yet to come. For now, All-Star Night coming up in just a little bit. We'll see you soon.